All right, this is the January 25th class for engineering. Minds and Machines, STS 351. Class was officially canceled today because campus is closed, but I'm going to go ahead and run through the lecture, most of what the lecture I was planning on this video. So there's a few students in the Hangout listening. Feel free to jump in with audio or just questions in chat, and I'll try to answer when I catch it. If I start rambling, go ahead and interrupt me, please. So I'm going to go ahead and just do some housekeeping stuff with the course, and then I'll run through my lecture. I wasn't planning on doing this, so I threw together just really quickly this Prezi. I'll go ahead and post a link to the Prezi in the chat so you can follow along on your own. Here, let me get the actual link to the Prezi here. It's not complete, and I'll probably be editing it while I talk, so just bear with me. I'll go to the chat there, and over here too. Over here. Yeah. So it just started. I see people saying they don't see anything, but I think you can press play now and watch it. You can also join at the link that I provided below. Okay. Please let me know if you have any questions. Okay, before we get into Aristotle, let me just do some housekeeping with the course. So you had an assignment due last night. And I'll go ahead and throw it up on the screen share. Over here, yeah. So you had this assignment due last night in lesson 1. I just wanted to say that most of you did an excellent job. This is exactly what I'm looking for with these discussions. Let me actually change my role to a student role so you don't see any grades. Okay. Yeah, so these kinds of posts, the length of these replies, and the content of them was really just great. Really what I'm looking for. I guess the only thing that I would suggest is I would like to get in a little more discussion. So don't only think that you have to state your own sort of thoughts. Most of these were sort of complete thoughts that people had. I was really excited to read all of them, so nothing was bad. But if you want to, instead of giving your own thoughts, if you wanted to reply to someone else's thoughts, you can do that also. So it can be a little bit more of a discussion. Another thing is that you can also post your own thread. I know one person did this. They posted their own thread. You can feel free to do that also if there's some topic. And really, I guess the individual threads are for some topic. So ideally, in the future, anyone who wanted to talk about Plato's allegory of the cave would post about it in this thread. If someone wanted to talk about the appearance-reality distinction apart from the cave, maybe post their own thread on the appearance-reality distinction, and a bunch of discussion on that topic can go there. And so hopefully the threads get divided up a little bit more by topic, so we can start to have some of these more more interactive discussions. I know we're just getting started here, so we're sort of feeling out how the course is going to work. And let me know if you have any suggestions on how to improve it, but that's basically my idea. Let me see if anyone has any questions or thoughts about that. Hopefully the assignment schedule seems okay. You had one assignment due last night, and then the next assignment is going to be due on Friday at midnight. On Friday midnight, you're asked to post 2 replies to the Aristotle material. Just to let you know, with the Aristotle, with the readings in general, on the main website, I'm putting the main reading, and you're really only required to read this main reading. That's the topic of the conversation. And then I'm putting up these additional resources, really just to help you along if you're struggling with some of these material, especially these historical texts are sometimes difficult to figure out what's even going on in the text. And so some of these additional resources might help situate you in the text and in the historical context in which it's written, so you can have a better understanding of what's going on. I'll keep doing that. A lot of these links are to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which is really one of the best online resources for philosophy. Basically, any question that you have about philosophy, there will be a pretty high-level scholarly article talking about both the history and the contemporary debates in philosophy. So I definitely recommend you read the SEP, especially as you're preparing for your own final papers, where you're going to be asked to do some of this research on your own, and the SEP will definitely be a useful resource for that purpose. I've been trying to fill in the later weeks, and I'll eventually put links to the other stuff. All the links to the material you can find in the syllabus, which is up here. So the core reading material you can start reading for all the weeks right now. One other thing is that I will eventually, I don't have this up yet, but I will eventually put some other resources. Like I have this big anthology, Philosophy of Mind anthology. It's like very thick. And I have a PDF copy of this that I'll put online. I'm getting some of the readings from here. The Aristotle reading came from here, but it also is, it's an anthology, so it has lots of papers, both historical and contemporary, on all sorts of different issues in philosophy of mind. And so this resource is, again, supposed to help you find things that you're interested in that you want to write on, both for your longer thought papers and for your final paper. I think that's everything I had planned to say for course dynamics. If anyone has any questions, go ahead and leave a comment, or you can leave a comment later in the open thread. Questions? Did Joynath ever join up? I guess not. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. Is the audio lagging? Everything sounds okay? If everything sounds okay, I'm going to go ahead and just jump into the lecture. So I linked to the Prezi for this, and you can join in. Oops, that's not what I want. I want here. Okay. Here's the Prezi. So I'm going to go ahead and blow this up, I think. No, it's not working. Oops. That's what I want. Yeah, okay. Okay. Okay, so we're going over Aristotle's De Anima today. So just for historical context, Aristotle was Plato's student. Plato, remember, was Socrates' student, and Socrates gets put to death. After Socrates gets put to death, Plato starts the Academy, which is this higher education facility, one of the first higher education facilities. We call colleges academies today, partly in reference to Plato's Academy. And at Plato's Academy, they studied a bunch of philosophy. Eventually, the Academy was supposed to be handed down to Aristotle, but it ended up getting handed down to someone else. So Aristotle went off on his own. He started his own school called Lyceum. In Aristotle's later life, he was the tutor to Alexander the Great. So he was well-known, well-regarded. He's the philosopher of the ancient world. And one of the reasons why Aristotle is so well-known, and his teachers, Plato and Socrates before him, is partly because Aristotle's work is so systematic. So Aristotle talks about everything. Maybe I should put myself back on the thing. Aristotle talks about everything in a systematic way. He gives an analysis that ranges from basic metaphysics and ontological issues all the way up through social theory and ethics. And his whole theory is systematic in a way that's very compelling. And if you understand how the system works, then you can see how it gets applied to all these different domains. This unified vision of philosophy, this architectonic theory of philosophy, is characteristic of Aristotle, and it's really characteristic of some of the great philosophical thinkers over history. But Aristotle's one of the first, one of the earliest to systematize his thinking in this rigorous way. I think Aristotle is also where we get a lot of the standard conception of the mind. So we'll talk. We haven't talked a lot about what the mind is, and we'll start talking about that today. We'll start seeing a picture of what the mind is developed today. We saw a little bit of this in Plato. So just to recap, remember in Plato's Allegory of the Cave, the mind doesn't play a huge role. The really important thing that Plato's after is the truth. And the role of the mind is that it's an instrument that allows us to find the truth. So remember, Socrates is talking in the context of the Allegory of the Cave about this analogy of knowledge to vision, to sight. And the idea is that knowledge is like giving the blind vision, that if you don't have knowledge, you're like a blind person wandering around not knowing what's going on. And if you learn something, if you gain knowledge, then you suddenly have vision of your surroundings. It's like giving sight to the blind. And this analogy is supposed to make sense because blind people just can't see the truth. But Plato rejects this view. Plato says this is not the correct view, that knowledge isn't like giving sight to the blind. The reason he rejects this view is because he thinks that anyone can see the truth, right? The blind person can't be given sight, right? There's nothing that the blind person can do to see. There's just some people who have vision and some people who don't. The people who have vision have this additional capacity that the blind people don't have. They can see where the blind people can't see. Right, and if knowledge is like this, then knowledge is this additional capacity that some people just lack. And this is what Plato rejects. Plato thinks that everyone has the capacity for knowledge. Everyone can see the truth if they're appropriately educated, right? So it's not just this additional capacity, but it's a capacity that everyone has if they're trained in the right way. And this training, he thinks, is a matter of turning to see the right way. And in the Allegory of the Cave, after the Allegory of the Cave, he talks about dialectic as the way of arriving at this training, right? This process of offering reasons, where I offer some reasons, and you can see the import of my reasons, and you can apply those to the same case, so that we come to the same conclusion. Right? We should both be able to see the truth through this offering of reasons. Remember, Plato's prime example of this kind of methodology is geometry, right? So if we want to I can prove the Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, of triangles. And I can prove it through a demonstration, through a proof, where I'm giving mathematical reasons for accepting that this triangle is as big as this triangle, or the hypotenuse of this triangle is as big as the hypotenuse of that triangle. Right? And I can demonstrate this conclusively so that anyone else who has a rational capacity can see those reasons and come to the same conclusion. Right? Geometry is this ideal case where simply through the offering of reasons we can all come to see and generate insights into the fundamental nature of the universe. Remember, Plato thinks that the universe works in these geometric ways, in these perfect geometrical ways, and through the offering of reasons we can gain insight into this, into the nature of the universe. So the mind here is an instrument. Plato calls it an instrument worth more than 1,000 eyes, because it can give us this kind of fundamental metaphysical insight into the way the world works. Right? But Plato doesn't give a systematic account of what the mind is or how it comes to have this insight. He has lots of suggestive analogies and descriptions of maybe the mind, but he's not really systematic about it, and he doesn't give an explanation of how it is the mind has these insights. And that's really what Aristotle gives. Aristotle is going to give a systematic account of the universe and the place that the mind fits in that picture. And his systematic account, it's problematic. There are things that are problematic about it, but it's also very convincing, and it was convincing for 2,000 years. Basically, Aristotle, the view that Aristotle has here is considered not only the view of the mind, but the view of the cosmos for roughly 2,000 years, since his time until around the scientific revolution, where this stuff all gets replaced with modern science. We'll see that discussion with modern science and how that replacement goes next week when we talk about Descartes. But this week I want to try to give you the best explanation of Aristotle I can So you see why it's compelling, why it stood as the cosmological theory for 2,000 years, for dozens of human generations. Okay, so that's my introduction. So I put together this little Prezi. This Prezi isn't perfect, but we'll see how this goes. Okay. So if I do this, I gotta do, yeah, good. Okay. Okay. So de anima, the word de anima is Latin for the soul. So the book is often translated as on the soul. But we'll see that Aristotle has a very particular definition of the soul, what it means to be a soul. And it's not what we typically mean when we talk about souls today. Today, when we talk about the soul, it's usually associated with a religious context, a spiritual context, and it has to do with things like the afterlife. And none of that appears in Aristotle's view. Okay. So let's go ahead and start from the beginning. I want to give Aristotle's whole picture here. So I want to start with his metaphysics. So Aristotle's metaphysics, his view is called a hylomorphic view, hylomorphism. And this comes from Greek words, the Greek word hyle, which means stuff, like junk, just a big pile of stuff. And then morphism, from the word morph, which means shape. Right. So a hylomorphic view is a view about how stuff takes its shape, and in particular, so shape, you can think like the outline of a thing, like the structure it has. But even better than just mere shape, think about morph in terms of the organizing principle. So Aristotle's view is that stuff takes some form because it's organized in a particular way. On Aristotle's view, you can't have stuff and form separately, right? All stuff comes in some form or other, and all forms are embodied in some stuff. So you never have stuff independent of the forms, and you never have forms independent of stuff. It's always together. And when it comes together, when stuff is put into some shape, it forms a substance. So Aristotle's view of substances are composite in this way. They're forms in some shape. So substance isn't the basic stuff. It's the stuff that has taken some shape. You're a substance, NGIT is a substance. Any composite substance that we can talk about the form and the shape separately is going to be a substance in this way. If we were meeting today in CKB, Central King Building, Central King Building is a substance. Central King Building is a substance. It's made of a bunch of stuff. Imagine all the bricks and wood and screws and all the other stuff, plaster, drywall, that goes into making CKB. But all that stuff isn't just the stuff. You can imagine all that stuff in a big pile out in a field, right? But that's not CKB. It's not just that stuff in a pile, but it's that stuff in the shape of CKB. So you can think of the shape here in the sense of like the blueprint that the architects were using to make the building, right? So it not just describes all the materials, but how they're arranged, how they're put together, right? The different parts, right? So the blueprints are also going to have blueprints for the electrical and the plumbing and the air ducts and so on, right? All these things have different purposes, and all these things have to fit together in the right way to make CKB, right? So all that stuff arranged differently wouldn't be the same building. That building is all that stuff in that form. When you put that stuff in that form together, you get Central King Building as a substance. Central King Building substance. NGIT, you might think of the whole college as a substance also. You are also a substance on this view, and we're going to talk about exactly how you're a substance on this view. But you're a bunch of stuff, a bunch of material stuff that takes the form of a human being, right? Humanity, being a human being, that's your organizing principle. And so once we understand what that organizing principle is, then we'll understand a lot about what you are, or at least the kind of thing that you are. You're a bunch of stuff that takes this shape, not just what your parts are and how they fit together, but also what you do, what you're supposed to do, right? What your behaviors are like, right? Human beings are social. creatures, for instance, and that's part of the organizing principle. That's going to tell you a little bit about how this substance takes form. The technical way of saying this in Aristotle, so Aristotle associates matter with potential, or stuff with potential. That big pile of CKB, stuff in a field, is potentially central king building. If someone actually builds it, right, puts it all together in the right way. It's potentially CKB, but it's not actually CKB until it's actually put in that form. Right? So the form is the actualization of matter. And a lot of the beginnings part of De Anima is talking about matter as potential and form as actual. Yeah, so, well, I'll get to this whole stuff later. I think that's it for the metaphysics. Let me go ahead and pause right here and see if there are any questions or comments. Is it sort of like atoms and molecules? Great question. Someone asked in the chat, is it sort of like atoms and molecules? So that's a great question. In some ways, it's like atoms and molecules. In other ways, it's not. So maybe the first thing to say is that Aristotle didn't believe in atoms. He believed in the elements. So he had an elemental theory, not the table of the elements. Yeah. He believed in the classical elements. Yeah, so here's the classical elements. The picture of the classical elements, yeah, where there's earth at the bottom, and then there's water and air and fire above that. This is the stuff that were the precursors that Aristotle thought that all things were made of. So you are a substance made of some combination of earth, air, fire, and water, and it's that combination put in that, arranged in that way, that makes you the kind of thing that you are. Aristotle didn't think that the elements were built out of more basic substances. I don't think. He did have a combinatorial view, though, right? So it's some combination of these materials put in the right arrangement, and you'll get you. And in this sense, it is a lot like modern theory, right? We also believe today that we're sophisticated arrangements of molecules of matter, right? Our atoms, our molecules are more complicated than the classical elements, right? We have the periodic table of elements, and we know that those elements can combine to form molecules that are more complex. And in fact, I'm a biological mechanism made of all sorts of really complex biological molecules that work together in all sorts of very complex ways. In that sense, it's very similar. Good. Any other questions on Aristotle's metaphysics here? There's one more little bit of the metaphysics that I want to talk about, but the important part, the really important part, is that everything is arranged according to these organizing principles, and the organizing principles tell you what kind of substance you are. So to be a kind of thing, to be a thing on Aristotle's view, remember, metaphysics is about what are the things, how do you identify the things? Well, in Aristotle's view, he has an answer to this. The things are the things that are organized, and they're organized by an organizing principle. And so if you understand the organizing principle, you can figure out what all the things are. Right? So I'm a human being organized human being-like. Right? I'm a member of that kind, and all the members of that kind are organized in the same, according to the same principle. And a dog is organized by a different principle, and that's what makes it a dog. Right? And a city is organized by a different principle, and that's what makes it a city. Right? To be a thing is to be that kind of thing organized in that way by that same principle. We'll see some examples of this in a little bit. Every single thing is organized by different principles, that's right. Although the principles might be related, so we're going to see that, so I'm a human being, and that gives me some organizing principles. I'm also an animal, and Aristotle recognized that I'm a specific kind of animal. So I'm organized by animal principles also, but in a particular kind of way. What kind of animal am I? I'm a human animal. And so human animals have some common features with the rest of the animals. We're sensitive creatures, for instance. Right? We have sensation. But I'm a specific kind of animal. I'm the human being. And so human beings themselves are organized in different ways. The dog is also an animal. And so insofar as we're both animals, we share an organizing principle at that level. but to be a dog is to be different than to be a person. And so the organizing principles for those specifics are going to be different. Yeah, this is all in Aristotle. This is all Aristotle's view. It's a very sophisticated view, given that it's 2,000 years old. Okay, so let me go ahead and jump back into the presentation. And if people want to jump on audio, that would be fine also. I would be happy to hear your voice. Okay. So everything is a substance. Everything is a substance, or potentially substance, depending on how it's organized. And on Aristotle's view, there's three basic kinds of things that tell you how all the different kinds of things are organized. Right, I'm an animal. I share things in common with dogs and other animals. But all the animals also share things in common. They're all the animate creatures. And so they all belong to this category. So this is Aristotle's physics. By physics, I mean his theory of motion. In particular, Aristotle thinks that there's different kinds of things, and they're distinguished. Their organizing principle is distinguished by how they move. So the animate things move by some internal principle, whereas the inanimate things move by some external principle. So an inanimate thing would be like a desk or a chair or a book, right? The book on my desk will sit there as a book, and it's not going to move at all unless something else moves it, right? If I pick it up, then it'll move. My cat can knock it off the table. If there's like an earthquake or something, that might knock it off the table also, but something else has to move that book. It's not going to move of its own, right? And this is what Aristotle thinks is the proper discussion of physics. Physics deals with these inanimate objects and how they move. But there's another class of motion, the animate objects. And the animate objects move by a different principle, an internal drive, you might say. Right, so the book on the table isn't going to move unless someone else moves it. But if my cat's sitting on the table, it's not going to stay there forever. Eventually that cat is going to get hungry, right? Even if no one else moves the cat's going to get hungry, or it's going to get bored, or it's going to get tired, and it's going to leave the table. And it's not going to leave the table because something else moved it. It's going to leave the table because it was moved by some internal principle. Right? There's some internal reason that moved the animate thing. And that's different from the inanimate things. And so Aristotle says the animate things have a soul. It's the soul that explains this internal movement. And it's the soul that only belongs to the animate creatures. None of the inanimate creatures have a soul in this sense. Right? There's nothing internal to the book that moves the book. But there is something internal to the cat that moves the cat. And that's what makes it animate. Aristotle also recognized a third class of things, a third category of motion. That was the eternal objects that move in regular patterns for all time. This is like the sun and the moon and the stars and the planets. They move across the heavens, but they don't move because something else is moving it, and they don't move from some internal drive on Aristotle's view. The planets and the stars and the sun and the moons, they all move by some eternal pattern. So they're geometrically locked into these patterns, and they will continue moving in these regular patterns for all time. Aristotle thought these were perfect circular patterns representing ideal geometry. Plato definitely thought that. So in order to understand the motion of these eternal creatures, you have to understand the pure forms of geometry, right? Those are the organizing principles that move these eternal objects. And that's different from the organizing principle that moves the animate objects, and different again from the organizing principle that moves the inanimate objects. Right? So if we want to learn about the soul, it's a particular kind of thing. It's one of these animate things, and we'll look at souls next. But let me go ahead and stop here again, and see if there's any thoughts. So someone asks, is one human made differently from another if they differ in personality? That's a great question. So they're going to differ in some ways. They're different people, and they're going to have different accidents, but they have the same essence on Aristotle's view. Yeah, so this is something I guess I didn't make clear. So the substance, this organizing principle, is the essence of a thing. Um, Aristotle is an essentialist. He thinks that there's some essential thing that makes the thing the kind of thing that it is. Right? There's something essential to trees that make them trees, and there's something essential to, pine trees that make them pine trees, and that make those pine trees different from oak trees or redwood trees. Right? That's the essence of the thing, the organizing principle of the thing. That's what makes it the substance. Here, let me go ahead and make this a little bit more explicit. Can I edit? Oh, yeah. So let's see this work. Yeah. Yeah, so I want to say, that the substance is the essence of the thing. And then the difference, the opposite of essence are accidents. Non-essential. So the accidents are this is still part of Aristotle's metaphysics. So the essence of a thing is its substance. Just me being picky. So the essence of the thing is its substance, and more particular, its organizing principle is the essence of the thing. And the accidents are the non-essential features of the thing. So, for instance, you might think that I'm a human being. I'm essentially a human being. You can't really do anything to make me not a human being. But I'm accidentally a teacher. So accident here doesn't mean like a mistake. It just means something that's not part of your essence. So I'm accidentally a teacher. I'm currently a teacher. That happens to be my job right now. But I could have had a different job. Right? I might not be exactly the same person, but I'm still a human being. My essence is still the same, even if my accidents change. Right? If I suddenly became a cab driver, I'd still essentially be a human, even though these accidental properties of me have changed. So one human being is different from another human being in their accidents, but they're still essentially human beings, and so they still essentially operate according to this organizing principle. Yeah, I hope that helps. Good. I hope this is going well. Um, oh yeah, I'm going to give the word. I'll give the word now. Now that we've talked for a while, the word of the day is essence. If you want to go ahead and sign in on the sign-in sheet using the word of the day as essence, I'll say it again at the very end of the video so that you know. But you can sign in right now using the word of the day as essence. All right. I guess I'm going to go ahead and jump back into the lecture. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Uh, so here we're starting to see already that Aristotle's theory. And by the way, De Anima is only about the animate creatures. So the rest of the stuff that I'm talking about here, Aristotle talks about in the metaphysics and in the physics. But here in the animate creatures, we're just worried about those creatures that are moved by some internal principle, namely the soul. And so the soul, again, we're not talking about a religious soul. None of this has anything to do with God or an afterlife or anything mysterious. In fact, Aristotle thinks that the soul is part of the natural world. It's how the natural world is organized. So we're talking about an animating principle, right? What is it that animates the creatures? So in the text in De Anima at 412b10, Aristotle says that the substance is that corresponding to the principle of the thing. And then he says at 412b17, he says, if the eye were an animal, sight would be its soul. For this is the eye substance corresponding to its principle. The eye is matter for sight. If the eye were an animal, sight would be its soul. So this is not again, hopefully it's clear, this is not a religious connotation here for soul. The soul is what the thing does, what its function is, what its organizing principle is. And so Aristotle talks about this as in terms of organs, and this is very important. So when we're talking about animate creatures, what we're talking about is organisms. And organisms are creatures that are made of organs. Let me come back in here to edit. So the word organ, I did this yesterday or the other day in my STS class. So the word organ, from which we get the word organism, it comes from the Greek word, the root rg. This is also where we get words like work, orgasm, orgy. But it means work, work in the sense that it performs a function. Right? That's what an organ does. Your heart performs a function for the organism, for the body. Your lungs perform a different function. These functions are the principles about what it does, right? So he says, again, if the eye were an animal, sight would be its soul. Sight isn't in the eye the way that a protein is in the eye, right? Sight isn't a material thing. It's an organizing principle. It tells you what the thing is for, performs the function what it's for. Right, so the soul of the eye is what it's for. And what is the eye for? Well, it's for seeing. Right? So the soul of the eye is sight. Right? Sight is not just what it's for, but what it does. So when Aristotle is talking about the soul of a thing, he's talking about what it does, what it's for, what function it performs. Right, he says the eye is matter for sight. And so you see here that the eye is the stuff, and sight is the principle, is what it's for, is for seeing. Right, so the substance is the seeing eye, and the eyeball itself is the matter, and the shape, the principle, what it's for, is what makes it a substance, right? Is the essence of the thing. The essence of the eye is sight. Now I can have an eye, if I was blind, say, somehow my eyes got damaged and my eye was blind, then the matter, the stuff would still be the same, but it would no longer have that role. I can no longer see, right? So in that sense, my eye would have lost its soul. But that doesn't mean that the eye's soul is in heaven or anything like that, right? That is not an afterlife. And in fact, you can see here that Aristotle's view doesn't allow for an afterlife, right? The substance of the thing, to be that kind of thing, you have to have the stuff and the purpose. So when you die, for instance, and you no longer have the same organizing principle, the stuff is also there, but the organizing principle is gone. So you're no longer there. The substance is also gone. So on Aristotle's view, it seems like you do not survive your death. Right? So this is a completely naturalized view of organization, of where the objects are, from what it does. Let me check. Okay, let's go ahead and press on. Okay, so the soul is what animates the physical things. So now finally we're in De Anima, and this is actually in your text, where Aristotle's talking about different kinds of souls. So we're just in this category of thing, different kinds of souls. So Aristotle thinks that any animate creature has a soul. Aristotle thinks that any animate creature has a soul, any creature that's moved by some internal principle. So in particular, plants have souls. Plants are, for Aristotle, moved by the simplest kind of soul, the simplest aspect of the soul. He calls it the nutritive soul. The nutritive soul is the animating principle that makes creatures grow, decay, and nourish themselves. And plants do that, right? Plants seek out nourishment, they grow, and they eventually die. And this is characteristic of nutrition as such. And so Aristotle thinks that plants have the minimal kind of soul, the basic requirements for a soul. And anything that has a soul has at least this, has at least the capacity for growth, decay, and nutrition. Anything that's alive. And that's maybe what we should talk about instead. Instead of different kinds of souls, different kinds of living creatures. Aristotle thinks that there's these three tiers of living creatures, three different kinds of living creatures. The most basic kind of living creature is the nutritive creature. All the plants, and for Aristotle, all the, if Aristotle life today, he would say probably the bacteria and so on are also nutritive in this way. But that's not the only kind of soul there is. So on Aristotle's view, that's the basic kind of soul. Anything that is alive has this kind of soul. But there's other kinds of souls also. The second class of souls are the sensitive creatures. And the sensitive creatures are the proper animals because they have sense perception and they move on the basis of their sense perception. So a plant can grow, it can seek out nourishment in the sense of the directions that it grows, but it can't pick itself up and move itself around to find better nourishment. Typically, it can't hunt other animals and that kind of thing. That's the feature of the animals. So any real animal, like a dog or a cat, is nutritive, but it does more things also. And in particular, the thing that sensitive animals do is that they can sense their world. They have sense perception. In Aristotle's view, the basic capacity for sense perception is touch, is a feeling, the feeling of touch. Vision and other kinds of sense perception are higher order sense perception, but any animal that's sensitive is at least sensitive in touch. And Aristotle thinks that what touch gets you is pain and pleasure, right? So if you can touch things, if you can feel things in the sensitive way, then you can also experience pain and pleasure. And it's this pain and pleasure that gets you to move. So animals like pleasurable things, they dislike painful things. And what it means to like pleasure things and dislike painful things is that you try to seek out the pleasurable things and you try to avoid the painful things. Plants just grow in any direction they can, wherever the nourishment leads. But sensitive animals can feel pain and pleasure, and they do things to increase their pleasure and decrease their pain. Right? So if you kick them, they'll run away. Right? Or if you give them food, they'll come towards you. Right? And it's this feeling of pain and pleasure that gives them locomotion, that makes them move around in the world. And can be recognizable as animals as such, right? So I gave the example of my cat sitting on the table. It's not going to sit there forever. It's eventually going to move around because it gets hungry, right? Hunger is a kind of pain, right? When it feels the pain of hunger, it'll eventually go move to find food, right? And so it's on the basis of this perception, understanding that it's perceiving things in this sensitive way, that we can explain its behavior. Why is the cat moving? Well, because it's hungry. Well, why is it hungry? Well, because hunger causes pain, and it needs nutrition to satisfy its soul. So here we have an explanation of the organizing principle that causes animals to move the way they do, right? And this is characteristic, the essence of animals, that they move according to their sensitive experience of pain and pleasure. But sensitivity isn't all you get with the animals. There's a special kind of animal, namely humans, who are the rational animal. And we have a special capacity, a special instrument, as Plato says. And this instrument gives us the capacity for reason. One of the things that reason does is allows us to evaluate our pain and pleasure differently. So animals can feel pain and pleasure moves them to act. but they act immediately on their pain and pleasure. As soon as my cat feels hunger, it'll go off to find food. And then it'll eat whatever food it finds. Human beings aren't like that. Human beings have reason. So I might be hungry now, and I might have a cake nearby, but I also know, right, I'm intelligent, so I also know that that cake isn't good for me. And in fact, it'll probably cause me more pain in the long run if I just eat that cake. So I'm gonna be rational and go eat some real food. What my rationality gives me, what my intelligence gives me, is a way of seeing beyond mere pain and pleasure and acting according to reasons that can outstrip our pain and pleasure. Right? I have knee-jerk animal reactions to act to the world in these sensitive ways. If I'm angry, I might lash out the way an animal lashes out. But to do so would be to give in to this lower part of my soul. I'm also intelligent, I'm also rational. I have the capacity for acting on the basis of reasons and not merely sensitivity. So I can evaluate my reasons. You are all going to college. Going to college is not the most pleasurable way of living life. Right? Sometimes it's downright painful, but you realize that the pain that you experience now will give you more pleasure in the future. It'll give you more opportunities in the future to do more things. And it's on the basis of your knowledge, right, your intelligence, that you can take this short-term cost for a long-term gain. And that's something that animals can't do on Aristotle's view. Okay, we're almost done here. I'm going to go ahead and come back to the chat and see how people are working. If this stuff is making sense. If any of this is resonating with anyone. We haven't actually talked too much about what reason is. We're going to talk about that on Thursday when we go through the Nicomachean Ethics. In the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle gives a view of intelligent reasons and the different ways that he calls them the virtues of thought, different ways that thinking might go well. And so we'll look at specifically what kinds of tools reason allows us to let us perform better, or at least different from the animals, that we have a different organizing principle from the animals. Any questions? Any concerns? Comments? Thoughts? It looks like I have 7 responses right now on the sign-in sheet. That's good. Can one have the sensitive and rational soul, but not the nutritive one? It's an excellent question. On Aristotle's view, you can't. On Aristotle's view, these are sort of tiered levels of the soul, and you need to have the basic nutritive soul in order to have any of the other parts of the soul, right? So so there's lots of ways of challenging Aristotle's view here. You can look at things like Venus flytraps. Are Venus flytraps animate? Or tumbleweeds, are they animate? Right? In some sense, they move, but is that enough movement to be sensitive in the way that Aristotle means? Sponges, here you can go the opposite way also. A sponge is technically an animal. It's in the animal kingdom, more closely related to us than to plants. Is it sensitive? I mean, in fact, a sponge starts off with a nervous system, but it eventually digests its own nervous system once it finds a suitable place to settle. And so it'll sit there without a nervous system. It starts off sensitive, but then eventually becomes less sensitive. But an even better question, and we'll get to at the end of the semester, is artificial intelligence. So you might think that a robot is rational, maybe even sensitive in the sense, maybe not in the sense of pain and pleasure, but that it can perceive its environment and act in response to a changing environment. But it looks like even though the robot can act rationally at a very high level, maybe it doesn't have the basic nutritive elements required for a nutritive soul, right? It doesn't grow, decay. It doesn't seek out nutrition. That's not always the case. Some robots do seek out nutrition. I remember a robot a few years ago, at the height of the oil crisis, they were developing robots that could use biofuels that it picked up from its surroundings. So it could mow grass and then put grass in its biofuels tank and then decompose it into fuel that it could run off of. Does that count as nutritive? If a robot was doing that, is that a nutritive robot? Right. These are all good questions. Hopefully, we have some of these questions in the discussion section. The robot that was putting biofuels in its tank, someone at Fox News, I think, figured out that, well, if it can use plants, can it also use animals? And I think the Defense Department contractor said, well, yeah, it can use any biomass to fuel itself. And then Fox started running articles about how these robots could be cannibals, could use corpses on the battlefield to fuel itself. And then that got a bunch of bad press, and so they stopped talking about cannibal robots. But the question is, are these kinds of robots sensitive? Is this an example of an animate creature, given the way that it behaves? These are very good questions. Keep asking these questions. Other questions? All right. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move on. Yeah, so I just want to do a few more things. So, again, we're seeing reason here as similarly to Plato, we're seeing reason here as an instrument for navigating the world. In this case, though, Aristotle isn't really concerned with the truth. Instead, he's concerned with action. He's concerned with doing the right thing or doing the beneficial thing. Not just. Let me go to the screen. Yeah. So he's concerned with reason not for its insight into the truth, but for its assistance in helping us act. And this, I think, is where we get our first big picture of what the mind is. And in fact, I think Aristotle's basically right. He's wrong in a lot of the details, and we can talk about a lot of the details. But I think he's right in his big picture view of what the mind is. I think we haven't talked too much about what the mind is, so I want to give, as our first entry into this, a quote. This is actually from, I'm going to go ahead and pull it up in context. This is actually from the Dennett article. This isn't Dennett quoting, but Dennett quotes a poet. I'll find it in 1 second. Yeah, this is my, oops, come back. So this is my first pass at what a mind is. And I think this is basically right. And not only is it basically right, but you see it quite clearly in Aristotle. So this is the poet Paul Valery. This is from Dennett's Kinds of Minds book, page 57. Dennett quotes Valery saying, "The task of a mind is to produce a future." This fits really well with Aristotle's view because Aristotle's interested in these organizing principles. What is it the purpose of the mind to do? What is the function of the mind to do? Or what is the function of any organized system to do? Right? He's thinking about these objects. He's thinking about the metaphysics in terms of this functional analysis, in terms of organization. And the mind is organized, I think this is right, the mind is organized to produce a future. The task of the mind is to figure out what to do next. Not to get at the truth, this is maybe Aristotle's big difference from Plato. Aristotle's not here interested in the truth. Maybe better he's interested in the good. So I give this little image, and I'll probably come back to this image a lot. This is the instrumental arc, where we start over here. This is where we are now. And we have some goal. The Greek word for goal is telos, end, sometimes called. We have something we want to do. And here we are. We need to figure out the means of doing it. And this is the instrumental arc. What means do we have of accomplishing our goals? Right? What methods, what instruments at our disposal do we have for realizing whatever ends we have? On Aristotle's view, all systems, all animals, have an ultimate end of the good. All animals want to realize the good life. All animals want to live the good life. The good life, not just a life of pleasure, but a life, you might say, of flourishing. So the Greek word here is eudaimonia, which means good spirit, or good soul. And if we understand the soul as the organizing principle, it means well organized. This is doing well or flourishing. Aristotle thinks that this is the main goal of all animate creatures. We all want to do well, to be well organized. Flourishing in the sense that a garden flourishes, right? So if I have a flourishing flower garden, then it's not just pretty, it's not just that it smells good, but it's also productive, right? It makes lots of flowers. Those flowers are all healthy and they're all doing well, right? If I have a fruit, if I have an apple orchard, a flourishing apple orchard is one where all the apples, right? It's not just that there's a lot of apples, but that they're all good apples, that they're delicious apples, they taste good, that they sell for a good price or whatever, right? Doing well. All creatures want this. Aristotle thinks it's the goal of all creatures to do well, to live well, and it's their job to figure out how to do this. And the different kinds of souls give you some equipment to do this, right? So plants have some equipment for nourishing themselves, and doing well for a plant, right? Flourishing for a plant means being well nourished, growing appropriately, and so on. Doing well for an animal means more than just growing well. You also have to live a life mostly of pleasure, not very much pain, right? That's reactive to the environment in the right sort of way. And doing well as a rational creature requires more than just avoiding pain and seeking pleasure. For a rational creature, it also means doing the right thing for the right reasons in ways that further your goals. Right? So if I want to be a doctor, if I have the goal of being a doctor, but I spend all my time doing drugs and playing video games, well, that's not a very intelligent way of accomplishing that goal, right? That's not the best method for realizing that goal. So you might think it's not intelligent to do those things because it's not going to actually get you to your goal. So we can see here how the mind is a means for making a future, right? The mind gives you reason, and reason helps you better accomplish your goals, whatever they are. Aristotle's going to think that the kind of goals that you have, the kind of ends that you have, is going to depend on the kind of creature you are, right? Your organizing principle, right? So the goal of human beings, right? What counts as a good life for human beings is going to be different than a good life for a dog or a good life for a dolphin. And maybe individuals are also going to have some differences in what counts as a good life, depending on their accidents, right? If you're the kind of person who likes, to have a lot of friends, then maybe the good life is one that's populated with lots of people. But if you're the kind of person that likes mostly to be by yourself, then maybe the good life doesn't have lots of people. And maybe different people are going to have differences slightly in these ways. But generally, we're all human beings, and so in general, there's also lots of goals that we all share in common. And you're more or less rational, depending on how well you're more or less intelligent to accomplish those goals given the means at your disposal. The task of a mind is to produce a future. The task of a mind is to make a future. And here we're starting to see that picture. Aristotle sees reason as playing a role in accomplishing the future. Aristotle thinks the future is always framed by the good, and one of the things that's going to change in this picture is exactly how we characterize the future, exactly how we characterize what means we have of accomplishing these goals. Aristotle's view is pretty simple from this perspective, but hopefully you see not just the particular things that he believes, but you're getting a sense of how this all systematically fits together in sort of big picture view. So next time we're going to see more about exactly what reason and intelligence is, and this will have a lot more to do with this instrumental arc, with how we accomplish our goals. This will also make it fit more in with like artificial intelligence and some of the stuff that's coming later. Hopefully you also see some relations to other things that we think about the way the mind works. The relationship to sensitivity, to perception, to pain and pleasure. Notice that, again, this is very different from Plato's view, but we're starting to see the beginnings of a modern view of the mind related to this kind of perceptual stuff. I think that's basically all I wanted to say. There's obviously a lot more to say about Aristotle, and we'll pick this up again on Thursday. But let me go ahead and check one more time to see if there's any questions. Anyone wants to discuss anything. You don't have to type in your discussion questions. You can come on the mic too, or come on video chat if you want, but you don't have to. There you go. Any other thoughts you have, comments you have? What did I say the word of the day is? The word of the day is essence, right? Yeah. So the word of the day is essence. Anyone can go to the sign-in sheet and sign in with the word of the day for attendance credit today. I will take attendance again on Thursday. If there's no other questions, I think that's... Yeah, it's a lot of information. I'm sort of glad that I recorded this so you can come back and look over it again. Hopefully the Prezi helped a little bit for seeing this stuff. This is usually one of the classes where I would fill up a whiteboard with this material. So let me know if you have any questions. Leave questions in the discussion forum on Moodle. Yeah, it's totally okay. You signed in twice. Don't worry about it. All right, I'll see you all on Thursday. Stay warm.